Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. The pre-patch is finally here and live over in the, not Dragonflight, but the War Within realms, but also beta for War Within has gotten yet another update with a ton of additional class tuning. I haven't taken a look at the entire list so far, but immediately what caught my eye was some of the bigger changes and buffs coming to the class of Mage, which is a class I feel like we've talked a ton about over on the channel since the alpha and the beta of this expansion. Usually we're talking about Arcane and Fire Mages, but this time around Frost is seeing some significant changes, with buffs coming from its hero talents of Spellslinger as well as Frostfire, as well as some individual changes in order to make sure that this spec does not fall behind the other two. As always, if you guys enjoy these regular War Within class updates, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So to start things off how we usually do, let's take a look at some of the more generalized changes, starting off with the hero talents specifically, where we are seeing some significant upgrades for Frost Mage, but the upgrades are kind of all over the place. All three specs are getting improved as of this build, which is really cool to see the tuning and how it seems that they're still buffing mages, even though we've seen them perform pretty well over the last few couple of weeks and months on the beta. But it's nice to see that at least it feels like this is a supported class. And if you are looking for a class to potentially main, I feel like with just how much attention mages have gotten, I will be very, very surprised if all of a sudden we start with season 1 of War Within content and then all of a sudden Mage is the bottom tier. I'd be very, very surprised just because of how much effort they've been putting into this class. Starting with Frostfire for the hero talents, all three of them has gotten some big or small update. For Frostfire, we're mostly seeing a buff for Frost Mages, with one of their abilities that allows either Comet Storm or a Living Bomb with Excess Fire. The Living Bomb procs from Excess Fire for Frost Mage and Fire Mages are going to function a little bit differently. Right now, for Frostfire Mages, both mages are using a reduced version of the Living Bomb that's slightly reduced in value, and Frost Mages right now have been playing with the reduced version for quite a while. They've noticed it, and the damage of Living Bomb, at least in dungeons, isn't amazing. As you can see, like tiered aside, and there's a couple of good AoE pulls there, and Living Bomb is just not really living up to its name, so they are thinking of buffing it, where Frost Mages in particular are not going to have a reduced version. The reduced version is only going to apply for Fire Mages, but that'll be available in a later update. Another hero spec that's getting a few changes is the Spellslinger, mostly from a performance-based adjustments, which is kind of interesting because I think this is the first time we're seeing some performance-based changes. So starting things off with the base ability of the Splintery Storms, or rather the Splintering Shards for Arcane or Frost, the changes to the maximum stacks of splinters you can have on a target is reduced to 8 until they learn the ability of Splinter Storm. So this change either means like a leveling change, or somebody found like a way to exploit the stacks of the splinters, and maybe like, since Splinter Storm converts 8 stacks into a Splinter Storm, maybe somebody found a way that you could just keep stacking these over and over almost into infinity, where these splinters could just live there forever. Control Instincts is another ability that has also been changed up a little bit. Control Instincts now has less of a damage variance, and the damage instances are now capped to 5 targets, and this ability no longer splashes. Volatile Magic is another ability that also now correctly deals damage to its primary target of embedded splinters, and now deals 1 instance of damage that scales based on the number of stacks of splinters that you get to remove. Both of these changes for these talents are not necessarily to reduce their damage, but actually to help control how much they make an impact in terms of performance, as in terms of the amount of instances of damage there are that are combat logged, which could actually impact your game's performance, stutters, FPS, freezes, or whatever. Besides this, for Frost Mages in particular, Frost Splinters saw a 100% damage increase. The embedded Frost Splinter damage has also saw a 100% damage increase. Frost Splinter Storm ability also a 100% damage increase in that regard. And they also adjusted the Splintering Orbs for Arcane in particular to be a little bit weaker, since Arcane usually like playing into Spellslinger heavily, where they'll now generate only 2 splinters per target of an Arcane Orb instead of 4, reducing a little bit in terms of how many splinters they can build up. But for Arcane, getting those resets on your orbs is a lot better than it is, or at least more frequent than it is on Frost. So for them, it's more like a slight little adjustment, mostly to make Sun Fury playstyle a little bit more appealing. You see, for fire mages, they found Sun Fury, at least very, very early into the alpha, a very, very pleasant hero talent to spec into, and a very popular choice at the very beginning. I think now mages have kind of been able to test out a bunch of different hero specs, and a lot of players have spread out a little bit more evenly around which ones are going to be better, and I'm sure we'll find like the best one for dungeons, raids, or PvP, or even delves and open world content once the game officially launches after all of the damage tunings. But Sun Fury definitely found success at the very beginning. But it looks like right now a lot of mages have been going with Spellslinger, so trying to make Sun Fury a little bit more appealing. For Arcane in particular, there's a talent called Burden of Power, and which will increase the damage of your Arcane Blast by 30% instead of 15%, so quite a decent bit of gain here. Plus, the actual phoenixes that you get to summon when you conjure your phoenixes, their non-exceptional spell damage is being improved by 20% for both specs. Greater Pyroblast damage that the phoenixes can conjure is improved by 30%, and the arcane surges cast by the Phoenix are improved by 100%, which means that every time you summon your Phoenix, it should be far more effective. And previously they made a lot more improvements for the Phoenix, like the animation of the actual Phoenix, the model, the damage you can do, the focus damage, and the Phoenix will be a lot better at focusing the primary target. He will have some cleaves, he will do additional damage to all other targets, but he will have your primary target as the main priority focus. And there is also a little bit of this damage that happens after the end of the Phoenix, which provides you with a ton of resources as fire or frost, which is still a very, very exciting combo that just amplifies the burst damage of your arcane surge. Speaking of Arcane, we actually saw additional buffs for the spec of Arcane, mostly to the bottom right half side of their talent tree. Bottom left hand side, which is mostly like a missile based playstyle where missiles put a debuff where enemies take additional damage from certain arcane spells. Missiles can cleave after 3 clear castings, and missiles can even help build arcane charges with some bad luck protection so you can more regularly build them. This allows them to spec into Arcane Harmony, which buffs the damage of your Arcane Barrage, and in AoE situations, you're just cleaving those barrages, and for every target you hit, you just do more and more damage. The bottom right hand side of the talent trees hasn't received nearly as much time in the spotlight, so they're trying to improve that a little bit. Arcane Barrage damage starting out, by the way, the damage has been reduced by 65%, so the baseline ability of Arcane Barrage is not going to be as effective. However, Arcane Barrage damage is now increased by 90% instead of 30% for every single arcane charge. This change was actually meant to be in the beta build from last week, but it never really made its way in. You essentially just ran around with the nerf version of your Arcane Barrage that didn't really scale as well with your arcane charges, but now it does, and it is a noticeable change. Besides this, Arcane Blast has also seen a bit of a damage buff with a 10% damage increase, and then we've seen additional changes to some of the other talents, such as Concentration, which plays off of your Arcane Blast ability. This effect now procs 3 times per minute instead of 2, which plays around the Arcane Blast and mana management specifically. As well as with the talent of Arcane Echo, which has a 25% damage increase, but now has a 0.2 second cooldown in between procs, also likely to adjust it for performance-based issues more than anything. Besides this, however, we did get even more additional changes for the spec of Fire, and then we actually saw a lot of buffs, as well as a very unique set of changes for the ability of Living Flame, which has been really fun to experiment with over on the beta. But with mages, we're seeing buffs for a lot of their base abilities, from Pyroblast buffed by 5%, Phoenix Flames improved by 10%, Fireball buffed by 20%, Flame Strike also has been increased by 10%, almost got it wrong. Quick Flame Strike, however, has been also increased further, increasing its damage by 25% instead of 20 to give mages a little bit more playability to play around Flame Strike as an AoE ability and not always have to lean into the ignites or living bombs. So they also increased the damage of Flame Patch as well by 30%, so they're trying to make Flame Strike a little bit more included as an ability. Maybe there'll be some value to it at some point. But then they actually made a pretty big change to Living Bomb, where they increased the damage of Living Bomb by 100%, which seems like that's a lot. However, there's a bit of a caveat to it. They're not necessarily trying to make Living Bomb better. Well, they are, but they're not trying to make it stronger. They're actually making it easier on your PC when it comes to doing dungeons and raids. So this is a whole new set of changes. Living Bomb damage increased by 100%. Living Bomb's frequency, this is the developer's note, has been creating performance issues in high target encounters. The following changes are targeted at reducing damage events like in your combat log, while only marginally affecting throughput. We'll be keeping an eye on these changes and how they'll affect fire mages in order to make these adjustments necessary. So the big bulk of it is going to be, let's improve lit fuse, but this will come with some limitations in order to help that performance gain. Some of the talents are going to be reduced in proc rate. Things such as lit fuse, proc rate is being reduced by 50%. Talents such as explosive are also getting reduced by 50%, and explosive ingenuity, which I saw earlier, this one, that's also being reduced in proc rate by 50%. Besides this, also reduce deep impact a little bit, so the cooldown for this ability and its ability to spread living bombs, the cooldown has been reduced from 15 seconds down to 10 seconds. Living Bomb itself is also now target capped at 8 targets, and the ability also no longer splashes, which is, I think, is going to be very interesting in some of those big target count situations. Living Bomb visual is also being reduced in fidelity within raid groups, which is an interesting change. Overall, Living Bomb should be still an effective ability, hopefully with additional tuning, but this also says that this game has been around for 20 years. It has a lot of spaghetti code of expansion code that's been stacked on each other, and it's also causing performance issues at times. And I wonder if maybe they need to take some time at some point in the future to untangle the code so things perform better, or maybe it might also be another reason as to why WoW 2 should come out at some point in the future. And finally, Frost Mages, even though they already got a buff when it comes to Spellslinger, I've seen even more buffs, and playing this one in particular has been a lot of fun recently, especially now that all those pre-patch builds are available in public, because trying to find builds on the beta can sometimes be difficult. If the class Discord community doesn't have some detailed builds, you have to go through logs, and logs on beta are not really detailed enough to tell you the entire talent loadout of the class. You really have to be looking for buffs and procs and little things like this to try to cadaver a build together. Or if you end up playing with somebody who's figured out a good build, you gotta screenshot it, grab it as soon as you can, or copy it if you can, if you have that available to you. So it's one of those things that I finally got a good build for Frost, and playing it with a proper build feels amazing. This mech is performing pretty well, and I'm glad that they're at least trying to improve it. They're buffing it all across the board, with Ice Sense improved by 10%, that's single target and cleave damage increase. Glacial Spike improved by 10%, also further increase in its output. Flurry by 12%, mostly single target, but it's nice filler ability, and that's going to be overall filler damage increases there. Blizzard buffed by 50%, with Frozen Orb improved by 10%, which is a noticeable bit of changes overall when it comes to mages in Mythic Pluses at the very least. Blizzard is going to be a good portion of your overall damage, but that's a nice bit of consistency that is very, very notable. Some of the other things is they also decided to improve some of the talents as well, like Splintering Ray's Ray of Frost damage. The AoE cleave is improved from 25% to 30%. Lastly, splitting ice damage for your lances has been increased to 90% instead of 80% cleave, which is really, really good for the ice stance based builds. Finally, and this is the last ability that got buffed by Frost Mages, which has been Cold, damage increased by 100%. Not the craziest ability. It's not like it does an insane amount of damage in Mythic Plus. It's pretty, let me see if we can find it really quickly. It's actually kind of low in terms of the overall usage. You mostly use it for the resets on your cooldowns in order to send them back a little quicker, but I guess it's a little improvement there, where I could see maybe Rare or Cold being a little bit better in PvP, because you do use it to slow down whoever is chasing after you as a Frost Mage, and that can be very, very helpful in that. So that type of damage is probably not going to be non-negligible. Overall, playing some Frost Mage, it feels pretty good, especially when it comes to big trash pulls. But also we got to test out the new Mythic Plus affix, which is, it grants you mastery if you're able to catch these void orbs that will slowly kind of crawl towards bosses and enemies in dungeons. It's a very interesting affix, and I think it kind of synergizes pretty well with any classes that have you in mastery. For Frost Mages, that's actually a decent buff overall, especially if you can get a bunch of them stacked back to back to back. Overall, Frost felt pretty good to play. I don't spend a lot of time on Frost compared to Arcane or Fire. I feel like I spend the most amount of time on those two specs over on the beta. But overall, the buffs for Frost do feel pretty good. You do feel quite powerful. And now that there's those builds that are available for pre-patch, and there's a bit more context behind how you should utilize talents and abilities, I feel like I'm starting to pick up Frost Mage a little bit better. Definitely not an expert on the spec at all, but that Blizzard change, Frozen Orb, Comet Storm, all of those things being buffed up by quite a bit, it is noticeable, and it feels really, really good. Hopefully Frost Mages won't be too far behind Fire and Arcane, the two specs that I've seen the most so far over on the beta, with Frost not really seeing as much play. Hopefully this will encourage more players to check out Frost. And for the class of Mage, now it looks like all three specs are getting quite a bit of attention, between Arcane, which has gotten weeks and weeks and weeks of buffs, Fire, which got a lot of attention towards the very early alpha and then in the earlier beta stages of War Within. And now Frost is seeing additional improvements, which is really good to see. Definitely one of the more exciting classes for me when it comes to War Within, just with the amount of attention that the devs have been able to give them over the last few weeks and months. But with that being said, I'm gonna start blabbing about mages. I really want to hear what you guys think about these changes in the comments down below. What are your thoughts on the changes for the hero towns for Frostfire, giving Frost Mages rather a little bit more living bomb damage, thoughts on Spellslinger buffs, as well as Sun Fury damage increases for Arcane? Do you think it's gonna see any play? Also, what are your thoughts to the buffs to Arcane, the Living Bomb changes for Fire, as well as the overall improvements for Frost Mages? Do you think it's going to be enough for them to be relatively close to specs like Arcane and Fire, or do you think they're kind of going to fall behind? Because on beta, we just don't see the spec get nearly as much play as Fire and Arcane, and I guess the question is it going to be enough for them to, what seems like, to catch up to the others? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this video, and I do hope you all enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found this video informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate that. And if you want to join our community, I would love to have you guys join us. We have a link down in the description of every single video with the channel Discord community. I would love for you guys to join in, and feel free to DM me or ask me any questions if you have any specifics on the beta or want to know what classes are doing well, how this newest beta change is feeling, how are the classes feeling, or any kind of questions. I'm always down for a DM. But also let me know your thoughts on everything that we talked about here in today's video, and I'll see all of you guys in the next one.